You are sitting in a room full of people your age. Someone cracks a joke, everyone laughs, and you laugh too. But even in that moment, some part of you is watching, calculating, reading the room, noticing who looks uncomfortable, noticing who is performing happiness, and who is actually feeling it, noticing things nobody asked you to notice. And you have always been this way, not because something is wrong with you, but because something happened to you a long time ago, in a house that asked too much of a child who had no choice but to give it. This is the psychology of the child who had to grow up too fast. And before we go any further, let me say this clearly. What you experienced was not a character flaw. It was not destiny. It was not proof that you were broken or damaged or too sensitive for this world. It was survival. Pure, raw, ingenious survival. The child you were did not fail. The child you were adapted, with everything available. In real time, under real pressure. And that child built something extraordinary inside you. Something that kept you alive, kept you functioning, kept you moving forward. But here is what nobody tells you. The systems we build to survive childhood do not automatically dismantle themselves when the danger passes. They stay, they calcify, they become the architecture of your adult personality. And what was once a shield becomes, slowly, invisibly, a cage. This is what we are going to explore today. Not how to fix yourself. You are not broken, but how to finally understand yourself. Deeply, honestly, without flinching, because radical understanding is the only thing that actually changes anything. Let us begin. You were the child who knew how to read a room before you knew how to read a book. You could feel tension in a house the way a sailor feels a storm coming, not by looking at the sky, but by feeling a shift in the air. Before anyone said a word, before a door slammed, before a voice raised itself above its usual frequency, you already knew. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, but that word is too clinical, too cold. What it actually felt like was this. Your nervous system was always awake, always scanning, always calculating the emotional temperature of every single person around you, because those people held the keys to your safety. You did not choose this. No child chooses this. It was assigned to you by your circumstances, and you executed it with the precision of someone who understood, on a bone-deep level, that getting it wrong was not an option. Maybe you grew up in a home with a parent who struggled with addiction. Maybe you grew up with a mother or father whose moods were unpredictable, warm one hour and devastating the next. Maybe you were the oldest child, and at some point, the emotional weight of the household quietly migrated onto your small shoulders. Maybe nobody ever said out loud that you were responsible for keeping the peace. But you felt it, you absorbed it, and you accepted it, because the alternative was chaos. Or maybe it was more subtle than that. Maybe your childhood was not dramatic. No crisis you could point to. No single event you could explain in a therapist's office as the reason for everything. Maybe it was just a quiet, persistent emotional absence. Parents who were physically present, but emotionally unavailable. A home that functioned but did not feel safe. A childhood that looked fine from the outside and felt lonely from the inside. Both of those experiences create the same internal result. A child who learns that the world is not reliably safe. A child who learns that love is conditional. A child who learns that the best way to stay protected is to become indispensable. To become calm. To become the one who handles things. To grow up fast. Now, here is where it gets philosophically interesting. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." And for a long time, people took that as a simple compliment to suffering, a justification for hardship. But read it again, slowly. He is not saying suffering is good. He is saying that the organism responds to suffering by transforming, by building new capacity out of old pain. The child who grows up too fast is doing exactly this. Building capacity, building emotional intelligence, building an extraordinary radar for human behavior, building the ability to regulate their own emotions at an age when most children are still allowed to be chaotic, messy, and completely unregulated. This is not nothing. This is actually remarkable. But Carl Jung would add a shadow to Nietzsche's statement. Because Jung understood that every strength has a corresponding wound, and the strength you built in childhood, the ability to take care of others, to suppress your own needs, to stay calm when the world was not calm, that strength did not come for free. You paid for it with your childhood. You paid for it with afternoons spent worrying instead of playing. You paid for it with nights spent listening to the sounds of a house that did not feel peaceful. You paid for it with the quiet, internal decision that your needs were secondary, that your emotions were a burden, that your vulnerability was a liability. And here's the part that is the hardest to hear. That decision made sense then. It was the rational, intelligent, adaptive choice for a child in your situation. But you are not that child anymore. And yet, that child is still running the show. Let us talk about what this actually looks like in your adult life. Because this is not abstract. This is Tuesday morning. This is a conversation you had last week. This is a pattern you have noticed, but maybe never had language for. You are the person who knows how everyone around you is feeling before they know themselves. You walk into a dinner party, and within 10 minutes, you have made a silent assessment of who is struggling, who is pretending to be fine, who needs to be drawn out of themselves, and who needs space. You do this without thinking. It is as automatic as breathing. And then you begin adjusting yourself to the room, pulling back your own energy to make space for someone else, amplifying your warmth in the direction of the person who looks like they are barely holding it together, becoming whoever the room needs you to be. You are brilliant at this, and it exhausts you in ways you cannot fully explain to people who did not learn to live this way. Because what you are doing is not just being kind or empathetic. You are enacting a survival program, an emotional survival program that was installed in you decades ago and has been running on autopilot ever since. Psychologists call this fawning, or people-pleasing, but those words make it sound small, make it sound like a choice. It is not a choice. It is a reflex. It is as involuntary in the beginning as pulling your hand away from a flame. You learned early that your safety depended on other people feeling okay. And so you made other people feeling okay your full-time job. And here is the shadow of that. You are deeply, profoundly uncomfortable with conflict. Not because you are weak. Because conflict in the house you grew up in meant something was about to go wrong. Conflict meant instability. It meant the ground was shifting beneath your feet. So you became a master at preventing it. At smoothing things over before they escalated. At absorbing tension before it had a chance to erupt. And as an adult, this means you often swallow things that deserve to be said. You apologize when you are not wrong. You shrink yourself in the presence of difficult people, not because you respect them, but because your nervous system is trying to de-escalate a threat that may not even exist anymore. This is what happens when survival instincts outlive the danger. There is another layer here that is harder to talk about. And we are going to talk about it anyway, because this is a space for radical honesty. You struggle with receiving. You are extraordinary at giving, at showing up. Taking care of others, at anticipating needs before they are even articulated. But when someone tries to do the same for you, something closes, something tightens, something in you becomes deeply uncomfortable, almost suspicious. As though care from another person comes with a cost you have not yet calculated. Because in the world you grew up in, love in that household was not unconditional. It was not simply there, steady and reliable like sunlight. It was something you had to earn, or something that came and went depending on moods and circumstances and how well you performed the role assigned to you. And so you learned, in the deepest part of your emotional architecture, that receiving love requires being useful. Requires giving first, requires making yourself worthy. The idea that someone might just love you quietly and completely, simply because you exist, that idea does not compute. Not yet, because you have no map for it. You know how to be needed. You do not yet know how to be loved. And this creates one of the loneliest patterns in the adult life of someone who grew up too fast. You attract people who need you, because that is the dynamic. That feels familiar, that feels like love. And you stay long after the relationship has stopped nourishing you, because leaving feels like abandonment. And you know what it is like to be abandoned. Even if you are the one doing the leaving, let us go deeper. There is a concept in Jungian psychology called the shadow. Jung described it as the part of ourselves we have repressed, the emotions, desires, and traits we deemed unacceptable and pushed down into the darkness of our unconscious. And one of the most painful shadows carried by people who grew up too fast is this: anger, not sadness, not fear. Anger, because you were not allowed to be angry. Anger was dangerous in the home you grew up in. Anger either escalated things or caused someone to withdraw their love from you, and so you buried it. You turned it into something more manageable. You turned it into helpfulness, into perfectionism, into overachievement. You took that raw, legitimate, righteous anger at having been robbed of a childhood, and you alchemized it into productivity, which is why, on the outside, you often look incredibly capable, driven, competent, like someone who has everything together, and on the inside, there is a pressure that never fully releases, a tension that lives somewhere in the chest or the jaw or the shoulders, a tiredness that sleep does not fix, not because you are depressed, though sometimes you are, but because you have been carrying an emotion you were never permitted to feel for most of your life. Nietzsche said, "The most common form of human stupidity is forgetting what one is trying to do. And what you have been trying to do all this time is feel safe. Just safe. That is the only goal your system has ever been working toward. Every pattern, every adaptation, every way you show up in the world is in service of that one ancient need. You want to feel safe in your own skin, in your own life, in your own relationships. And you have been doing everything except the one thing that would actually provide it. Here is the pivot. Here is where we move from observation into understanding. Most people, when they recognize these patterns in themselves, make a mistake. They treat the patterns as enemies. They try to override them. They set rigid boundaries. They force themselves to be vulnerable. They make rules for themselves. And then they feel like failures when the old programming reasserts itself. Because you cannot bully yourself into healing. You cannot shame the child inside you into silence. That child, the hypervigilant one, the one who learned to take care of everyone, the one who swallowed their anger and earned their love and grew up before they had to, that child did not create these patterns because they were weak. They created them because they were extraordinarily intelligent. They deserve your gratitude, not your contempt. This is the reframe that changes everything. Think of it this way. Imagine a soldier who has been at war for 20 years. They have learned an entire architecture of survival, how to sleep with one eye open, how to read a room for threats, how to suppress emotion in a crisis, how to keep moving forward when everything inside them wants to stop. These are not flaws, they are extraordinary capacities forged under impossible conditions. But then the war ends, and the soldier comes home, and they are still sleeping with one eye open, still scanning every room for threats, still suppressing every emotion in a crisis, still keeping moving, even when rest is the only thing that would actually help. Not because they are broken, but because nobody told them the war was over. Nobody helped them understand that the skills they needed to survive the battlefield would actively harm them in ordinary life. You are that soldier, and this is me telling you, the war is over. But let us not be naive about what it costs to lay down the armor. Because the armor is not just pain. The armor is also identity. You have built an entire sense of self around being the capable one, the reliable one, the one who does not fall apart, the one who shows up, the one who can be counted on. And these are genuinely beautiful qualities. Do not misread this. The world is better because people like you are in it. But there is a difference between being capable and being trapped in capability. There is a difference between choosing to show up for people because you love them and showing up for people because your nervous system cannot tolerate the guilt of not showing up. One is a gift you give. The other is a tax you pay. And only you know, in the quiet of your own chest, which one it has been. This is what Jung meant when he wrote about the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you actually are, as distinct from who you were shaped to be. The person you were shaped to be, by a childhood that needed something from you, is real, but it is not all of you. Somewhere beneath the hypervigilance and the people-pleasing and the performed calm and the competence and the wall, there is a person who has needs, who has preferences, who has a right to rest, who has a right to be angry sometimes, who has a right to be held without having earned it. That person has been waiting a very long time. Let us talk about relationships, because this is where everything we have discussed either becomes liberation or re-traumatization. People who grew up too fast tend to fall into one of two relationship dynamics, and sometimes they oscillate between both. The first is caretaker. You become the emotional anchor in every relationship, the one who regulates, the one who soothes, the one who intuits and adjusts and makes space and gives. And there is a part of you that feels comfortable here, because this is the role you know. This is the role that, in your childhood, meant you were safe. But it is also extraordinarily lonely, because when you are always the one holding everything together, there is nobody holding you. The second dynamic is avoidant. After years of giving everything and receiving little in return, something in you closes. You build walls that look like independence. You tell yourself you do not need much. You become proud of your self-sufficiency. You equate needing other people with weakness, because needing someone in your childhood often meant being disappointed by them. And so you keep people at arm's length, not because you do not love them, but because your nervous system has learned that closeness is where you get hurt. Both of these are forms of armor, and both of them are keeping you from the thing you most deeply want, which is connection that is safe. Love that does not come with conditions. A relationship where you do not have to earn your place. Here is something science wants to say. Developmental psychologists use a term called parentification. It describes what happens when a child is placed in the role of emotional or practical caregiver within their family, when they become the confidant for a struggling parent, when they manage the household because an adult is unable to, when they suppress their own developmental needs to meet the needs of the people who were supposed to be meeting theirs. Research consistently shows that parentified children develop what is sometimes called premature ego development. They build adult-level cognitive and emotional frameworks at ages when the brain is still in critical developmental stages. They become extraordinarily competent in certain areas, while other parts of a development, things like play, rest, receiving care, tolerating uncertainty without trying to control it, remain stunted. This is not a moral failing. This is neurodevelopment under stress. And here is the part that is both heartbreaking and hopeful. The brain remains plastic, malleable, capable of rewiring not just in childhood, but throughout life. The neural pathways that were built around fear and hypervigilance and self-suppression are not permanent. They are just deeply practiced, and deeply practiced can be unlearned slowly, gently, with the right conditions. The conditions are not willpower. The conditions are safety. You heal not by forcing yourself to be different. You heal by finally, for the first time, experiencing what it feels like to be in a relationship, with a person, with a therapist, with your own self, where you are allowed to be imperfect, where nothing bad happens when you express a need, where your anger is received without catastrophe, where your vulnerability is met with tenderness instead of punishment. You heal by practicing, in small ways and then larger ways, the experience of being held rather than holding. So here is where we land. You are not anxious because you are weak. You are anxious because your nervous system learned, correctly, that the world was unpredictable. You are not controlling because you are difficult. You are controlling because the alternative, in the world you grew up in, was chaos. You are not emotionally unavailable because you are cold. You are emotionally unavailable because opening fully in the past led to pain. Every single one of these patterns is an act of intelligence, an act of loyalty to the child who needed them to exist. The work, and it is work, not a weekend retreat, not a single epiphany, but real, ongoing, honest work, is to slowly, with great gentleness, begin to tell your nervous system a new story. The story that you are safe now, that you are allowed to rest, that your needs are not a burden, that you are worthy of care you did not earn, that you are allowed to be a whole, messy, resolved human being who is still becoming. That the child who had to grow up too fast deserves, at last, to finally feel like a child, held, seen, enough, just as they are, just as you are. This video could have ended there, and part of me wanted to let it. But there is one final thing that needs to be said, the hardest thing. The thing that requires you to sit with it rather than immediately make sense of it. You may have spent your entire life being proud of how fast you grew up, wearing it as a badge, telling the story of your difficult childhood as evidence of your strength. And it is evidence of your strength. That part is true, but the badge has another side. The badge is also a wall, a way of making the pain mean something so that you do not have to feel it. A way of turning devastation into identity. An identity is hard to grieve because grieving it feels like losing yourself. But here is what is on the other side of that grief. A version of you that is not performing strength. That is not constantly proving it. That does not need to be the most capable person in the room, because their worth has nothing to do with their capability. A version of you that can sit in a room full of people your own age, hear someone crack a joke, and laugh. Not because you are managing the room, not because you are calculating the emotional temperature, but because you are actually there, present, unguarded, free. That version of you is not a fantasy. It is not something that belongs to people who had easier childhoods. It is available to you. It has always been available to you. And the path to it does not begin with fixing yourself. It begins with understanding yourself completely, honestly, without flinching, which is exactly what you just did. Now, I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it rather than answer it quickly. Which truth in this video hit the hardest? Was it the moment you recognized your hypervigilance, not as anxiety, but as intelligence? Was it the idea that you know how to be needed, but not how to be loved? Was it the anger you alchemized into productivity? Or was it the invitation, quiet and enormous, to finally let the war be over? Whatever it was, that is your edge. That is where the understanding wants to go deeper. That is the door. And there is something on the other side of that door that we have not yet fully explored. Something about what happens when the child who grew up too fast finally encounters a world that asks them not to perform, not to caretake, not to earn their place, but simply to exist. That conversation is coming, and it will change the way you understand everything.